what is this deeper, wiser, more life-affirming notion of being in the world? Why are they doing this? And in several articulations, people told us that for them, nature was their God. Leaves, trees, animals, spirits in the forest were their gods. It is with them that they take decisions. So it was not for them to decide that they can give away their lands for mining. It was for the whole collective of humans and more than humans that was part of the decision making of what should happen in that territory. And what these people were doing, are continuing to do so, is to pay attention to the winds, to the lands, to the mountains, to the rivers, and really listening the important lessons that are being taught and seeing that there is the rhythm of being in tune with the rest of nature, the way mountains or rivers or forests engulfs your entire entity. You can't see the separation between who you are and them. And so that sense of common kinship that you share with land and water and wherever you are with earth is what guides you into really caring about the natural world and standing up, facing all signs of repression and oppression of nation states and corporations.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The story of Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and participate wisely. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with folk involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Greetings, dear Earthling. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. This is Dan, your host and guide. Thank you for tuning in. It means a lot. So I hope you are holding tight out there in these unravelling times, increasingly absurd times, I find, as we try to navigate this age of consequences, the collapsing systems, structures, stories, institutions and worldviews, while still trying to use the same logics, the same ways of thinking and knowing the world that have led us to this mess. It's painful. Right now in the UK, it's political party conference season, at a time where our national identity has focused on tying flags on lampposts, while angry white men are being persuaded and whipped up by algorithms and political strongmen to blame the collapse of everything: public services, jobs, opportunities, community health, housing, and all Western entitlements on immigrants. And the government, in response, is trying to bring in digital identification systems to solve the problem. Meanwhile, elderly and disabled people are being arrested for holding up signs protesting against the massacre of innocent human beings in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. That's despite all leading scholars on genocide, including the UN, saying this is a genocide. Oh, and the Planetary Boundaries Science Lab at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research has just revealed that 7 of the 9 critical Earth system boundaries have now been breached. That's one more than last year. That's the planetary equivalent of being told by a doctor that about 80% of your vital organs are completely maxed out. Democracy, eh? We modern humans continue to live by a completely different set of rules from every other species on this living earth. Our human-centric civilizational logic of separation continues to delude us that we are separate from the rest of the spaceship, from the Earth, from each other, and from the wider web of life. We are passive passengers, extracting, transacting, and distracting our way into the future, seemingly oblivious of the collapsing realities already well underway. Arguably an entirely predictable outcome of this separation logic. And where the scale and speed and depth and complexity of change required appears to be completely absent from our leaders and crumbling institutions that continue to grasp the illusion of certainty, command and control, and linear progress. Not an uttering of humility, of not knowing, of grief for the violence of these times, of compassion and love for the precious life on this miracle living spaceship. Nothing. So this brings me to this episode. What does it mean to practice democracy, not just with people, but with rivers, forests, mountains, and the more than human world? In this episode, I'm in conversation with Shrishtee Bajpai, researcher, activist, and writer working on earthy governance, interspecies justice, and radical alternatives to dominant systems. Shrishti's work emerges from her deep relationship with the river she grew up alongside in northern India, one of the most polluted rivers in the world. That grief and love have shaped her life's path, exploring how communities can co-create governance with rivers, mountains and forests, and what it means to truly listen to the more than human world that holds us. We talk about collapse and continuity, why collapse is not just arriving, but has long been lived in the global south. Earthy governance, how communities take decisions in dialogue with forests, deities, bees and rivers, the lands they are entangled with. Radical democracy, power rooted in places, not just parliaments. The absurdities of modernity, the schizophrenia of modern cultures that worship rivers as goddesses while polluting them till they're almost dead. And how we might awaken our collective capacities to listen to the more than human world that we humans are just one little part of. Shrishtee reminds us democracy is not only about human voices, a very recent focus, it's about rivers, mountains, winds and creatures who have always spoken, if only we slow down to hear. So imagine if we began to practice earthy governance in the places we call home. What might emerge through the tender roots of place-based, living, democratic practices, co-created by human and more than human communities, listening together, learning together, decision-making together, becoming with. And while getting nature on the board of businesses, for example, is helpful, what if we got the boards re-entangling out with nature? The earth communities that all businesses are birthed from and utterly dependent upon for their futures. I think it's fair to say our political systems are brittle, decaying. They are not serving the majority of life on this earth. It's going to need many of us to co-create alternatives that serve life itself. This, I would suggest, is the time to step into that work with humility, compassion, and a willingness to sit with the discomfort of paradox, contradiction, and not knowing. What are we choosing to seed now in these times? Knowing that this is generational work, long time work, that we may not see the impacts of our efforts in our lifetimes, but our future ancestors will. What is yours to do? What if at least we began by listening to the lands we call home, to the many other voices in the room, so to speak? So, let's cut to it. If you enjoy this episode, please do share with someone, post it on your socials, sign up to our Substack to get every episode in your inbox, plus regular writing and news on our Becoming Crew gatherings and events. And if you're really feeling the love for this, perhaps you might flip to a paid subscription. It's about the price of a pint a month. We're an ad-free, independent, and we need the support of our listeners. A massive shout out to those who are supporting us in this way. Yeah, go to becomingcrew.substack.com to find out more. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast in conversation with Shrishtee Bajpai. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Right, Shrishtee, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thanks, Dan. I'm so happy to be here.
It's good to see you. It's taken us a little while, hasn't it, as we've been sort of moving around.
Yeah, but we are finally here.
Exactly.
And audio is working fine.
Well, everything's working. That's good. For now.
Yeah, for now.
The universe is with us. So, tell me, and tell our listeners actually, whereabouts are you on Spaceship Earth, and how are you showing up today in this moment?
Mm-hmm. Well, a part of me is very happy to be in conversation with you. And a part of me, and I was sharing this with a friend just before our call, is feeling a bit helpless about the world at the moment. And I'm generally a very hopeful person, and I'm still full of hope. But at this moment, maybe showing up with a little bit of helplessness about what's happening in the world, and so little we are able to do about it. And right now, I'm joining you from Pune in India. It's in southwest. It's a very interesting part of the country. And yeah, right now joining from here, enjoying a little bit of drizzle. Yeah, and saying bye to the monsoons. And yeah.
I think you might be saying bye to them. I think they're arriving here because we've had sort of the last couple of weeks, the rain, the autumn is arriving. Definitely. It's just big rains. And actually it's kind of like, I mean, it's very, very needed, but really in that kind of, that shift, that real transitioning into the autumn, which I actually love, but it got so dry here this summer, it was like, I have this kind of big, like huge water butt outside my house, which collects rain. And usually it will last me all summer, with the vegetable patch, and it will pretty much supply. But this summer, the whole lot emptied, and we've had a few weeks where, there just hasn't been anything. So the rain is coming, but it's very welcome. But it's that shift, that real shift when the water is, I don't know, just everything everything's, there's this weight that's the leaves, everything, the hedgerows, the trees, everything's starting to kind of collapse, and sort of surrendering. I always feel like a letting go that's beginning. So are you at home? Is this home for you now? Is this where you are in India? Is that your base?
Yeah, at the moment, I mean, for the last 10 years, this is my base. But that's not where I'm originally from. I'm actually from the North Indian plains. I was born on the banks of river Ganga, or Ganges, as it is known, or she's known in English. Yeah, and that has shaped a lot of who I am today, and my work, and my research, my activism, my writing. Yeah, the river, so revered, is so polluted as well. And in many ways that has kind of moved me in directions that I find myself often now.
Yeah, beautiful. And we'll absolutely dig into all of that. We'll dive into that. We'll dive in because that's obviously what I'm really fascinated with, the work you do, and I really love to sort of really explore that relationship with the river and the rights of nature work, and yeah, that's I guess the intention for this. Plus, me throwing you a few invitational questions around this moment as well, and this time, and what we're being invited into as stewards or crew, as I call it, on board Spaceship Earth. And so I guess I've been starting these really in the last couple of years because of what you spoke to, because we're living in such uncertain, such ever-changing times. And I'm fascinated with how we experience life around us, and we're all experiencing this world at this time in different ways. And so I was kind of like always interested to start off with, like, what are you sensing, what are you experiencing in this moment, in the ecosystems that you're part of, let's say?
So just 3 days ago, I came back home, and before that I was in Trans-Himalayan landscape here in India, in Ladakh. It's a very unique region. It's a cold desert, very, very different from the rest of India. And it rained for 3 days in that cold desert. And it was in 52 years that it rained like that. And the region had not received that much rain, and it cannot sustain that much rain. And while I was there witnessing that rain and witnessing in many ways what we're doing to our environment and what's happening all around us, because the river Indus flows through that landscape, which eventually then goes to different North Indian states who witnessed the massive catastrophe of floods this year and lots of destruction. And for me, this question of that we are living in these times that has an accelerated, in many ways, an accelerated response and impact of all that we have done to the earth. And it's not happening slowly, it's happening very fast, and it's happening at a rate that sometimes it's difficult to fathom, and it's very overwhelming. And there are lots of people who are suffering because of that. The whole of state of Punjab, which falls under the Indus Basin, was flooded and is suffering, and all their crops were destroyed. And to me, sometimes I think to me, my ecosystem and to the world around us, these times are feeling as if they're coming too fast and we are not prepared for them. And in many ways, the West articulated that the collapse is arriving, and people in the global South have lived with collapse all this while, and they're living in collapse. But I think even in all of this, we are not prepared to really deal with this. And when you're not prepared, it comes with a lot of psychological impact, and you feel helpless. And I know so many people, especially in the communities, saying that, what do we do about climate change? The water is drying up, glaciers are receding, and the rivers are flooding. We don't know when a cloudburst would happen. And these times of uncertainty, both in terms of climate, but also just generally what we are doing to the rest of nature and our fellow beings, is just unprecedented and in many ways overwhelming to make sense of it. And I feel I am feeling this underlying, I think all humans have had this sense of brutality, but it's sort of coming out and manifesting itself in all its forms. And you can see the brutality that's happening in Gaza and continues to happen, and sort of everybody is kind of like, it has happened in front of all of us, and we have raised voice and done whatever, but it just doesn't matter. And people are doing right now, but it just doesn't matter. So this just doesn't matter, and this sense of helplessness is, I think, all of us are really surrounded with. You have to, on everyday basis, I am fighting against it on everyday basis, because I don't want to be feeling helpless and hopeless and that nothing in the world will change. And maybe a part of me just doesn't feel like that, but the feeling is strong and overwhelming in all that's happening in the world right now is just everywhere and so fast and so brutal and difficult to fathom sometimes.
Gosh, yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? It's interesting. As you were speaking this afternoon, actually, I was just starting to write something that I'm actually this word collapse. This word collapse. I was at an event yesterday, and I've been very interested with that. And you spoke just then of there's obviously so many people who've been living with collapse for so long, right? As part of, I guess, the consequence of this sort of globalized, this globalized planet that's been sort of built over the last few decades, particularly. But I was interested in this word collapse. But when we think about, everything collapses, right? Everything in life comes to an end, right? It's constantly cycling, and yet when we sort of talk about the dominant system, or systems, or structures, or whatever we want to call them, the idea when we speak of their collapse seems to sort of, it terrifies some people, and obviously there'll be other people who are like, thank God, it's like the quicker, you know what I mean? So there's this kind of, so I'm finding it very interesting, and also because I feel that at least in the UK culture where I am, there's a kind of phobia against and a sense of like almost the people say, oh, what are you talking about? It's dooming, and it's like, but also this sense of like I have that the more that we avoid paying attention to that thing, then the worse conditions become, right? Because if anything in your world is collapsing, the first thing you really need to do is pay attention. Do you know what I mean? If your roof's collapsing, or whatever. So I don't know how that plays out in India, and is it through classes and all that kind of stuff. But it's just a very live kind of inquiry at the moment. So I don't know if there's anything in there that you can relate to, or I'm just interested what it is that's going to accelerate bigger groups of people in our societies to go, this stuff is decaying, it's rotten, it's we need to accelerate the alternatives, you know what I mean? Anyway, I don't know, maybe I'm just dreaming, but
I guess I first encountered the use of this term in a conference that I was attending in Copenhagen, where this climate scientist was presenting all the figures to the group of people, saying that the world is moving towards collapse. A part of me agreed with it, but part of me was rebelling against that, because he was saying that there are going to be floods, there are going to be increase in temperatures, and a bunch of other things like that, which is true. But the fact that it is arriving was something that I had big issue with, because farmers in Bangladesh have been living with collapse for a long time. Farmers in North Indian plains have been living with collapse for a long time. Collapse in a sense of something that we are not able to make sense of has been part of our history origin for a long time, and it has always been part of people's story and narration. If you speak to communities in Northeast India, they will always talk about this great massive flood that happened, and even communities in Turtle Island speak of a massive flood that happened. So collapse in that sense of destruction, we can call, and sometimes the English language fails us to really describe what it is, but in many ways some churning that changes the lived reality of many people has happened all across our history. So one is that, and of course people are living with that, and in so that sense, I don't know what the West means by collapse, but in many ways what people are experiencing in everyday basis in many global south contexts, migrant laborers living in the cities, living in what Kim Stanley Robinson calls in his book as light bulb temperatures, has been an experience for so many people all the time. So what we are doing to our planet is not just about collapse that's going to be experienced by a few people in one part of the world. It is being already experienced. It's a continuous process, and that continuous process has been happening because of the way our societies are organized, where power structures eliminate a large section of people and marginalizes them and put them at the risk of experiencing this. There is accumulation of capital, there is destruction and continued destruction of the environment. So it's not something that's going to arrive. It's already happening all the time of the choices we are making, which actually keeps leaves half of the humanity behind and destroys the earth. When those choices are made, when those decisions are made in the decision-making spaces, that's when the collapse happens. So that's really the collapse of how humanity has come to take decisions and how humanity has come to only think about themselves and not the rest of nature. So I guess that's where I would land on that topic.
And it's kind of like it's, you know, and thank you for setting out like the sort of the reality from a sort of an earth systems perspective. And I think that's the bit that still blows my mind, is that in the West, and I can only speak of the UK because that's where I am, but it's almost the you know, even it's two steps even away from that. People are fearing the collapse of the kind of the systems and structures that support this way of life, you know, this kind of consumerist way of life, you know, sort of like, and still unaware that all of this is being, you know, upheld and supported through this living earth, you know. So even the sort of consequences of that type, you know, of the real system that's collapsing, you know, there's still such a big gap, I think, in consciousness, in awareness, in understanding, you know. Anyway, this is where we're at. This is where we are. Before we dig in to you and your work and you know, let's get into some of the why you're doing the work that you do. But there's a question I'm really curious about, which I think is connected to what we've just talked about, but it's almost like I'm feeling like I'm using this word absurd a lot at the moment. I feel like the times are getting more absurd. You know, it just don't make any sense. And I'm curious about when you think of the modern culture that you see around you. You know, we could call it modernity, right? But the modern culture. What's the most absurd thing that you're noticing right now with the modern culture?
Interesting question. One thing is difficult to say. There's so much that one is witnessing, but I feel maybe something that comes really on top of my head is like the sense of complete schizophrenic behavior of human existence. And yeah, that sounds so absurd sometimes, and I don't think any other word describes how as a collective human existence is so, and I'm including even the ones who are maybe talking about like, you know, people like you and I, somehow in some ways we're not able to make sense of this world. And of course humans have always tried doing that and have not come to any good answers, but just such obvious schizophrenia is so absurd to me. This continuous belief that we can exploit the earth and fellow beings, humans and non-humans, and we can thrive. I mean, in what sense, in what culture, in what religion, in which spiritual world or not, can this kind of stark behavior result in any sort of well-being for anybody in the world? But we living in that context and that belief in modern lives and systems. I guess sometimes questioning it, and sometimes not, many times not. But that's how our lives are organized, you know, the way our transport systems are, the way we fly, the way everything is just so counterintuitive to life itself.
It's so extreme, isn't it? That's what I was thinking.
Exactly.
It's so extreme. Like everything is extreme extraction, extreme energy, extreme force. Everything's just, that's what I'm sort of getting when I'm listening to you, and that's what it's making me feel like, because that's the thing, and yet we see all of this stuff that's playing out around us, and yet we still seem to be sort of keep going. just keep going. Everything's falling apart, but we'll just keep being extreme. And like you say, it's the absolute sort of counter logic of a living thing. The balance.
Yeah, we're totally out of balance.
Totally out of balance. So on that, you do many things. You're a researcher, a writer, an activist, and you're exploring, from what I understand, these, very much intersections of justice around the living world, social justice, and systemic shift, systemic transformation. But your real deep dive, at least as far as I can see and understand, is this work into more than human governance and what you call earthy governance, which I'd love to get into. But I wonder, I always like to do this for listeners actually, it's just to whether you would just share a little bit of your backstory, a little bit of the things that got you into this place of, why this work is now so alive for you. A little bit of some of the threads, and maybe some of the things that have happened, the paths, the moments that have shaped really what is most alive for you now in this work. Could you do that before we dig into what is this stuff?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I never thought it like that when I was growing up. But as I was saying earlier, that in many, many ways, the river Ganga and how it is destroyed and polluted shaped what I'm doing today, and shaped a lot of me as a young girl who was growing up in the city of Kanpur, which is where I was born, in North India. And it's only, I think, now with all the work that I'm doing, I realize that sometimes we don't see how relational we are to the rest of nature and the environments that we live in. But they shape us in many ways, good and bad. And for me, it was mostly how the river was polluted. The stretch of the river is the most polluted in the world. It's the most polluted in the entire stretch, wherever. The city is the most polluted in the world, but the stretch of the river in that city is the most polluted the river gets anywhere that it flows. And it's that destruction, it's that pollution, it's that desecration of her in every conceivable way that shaped me. And I often now see that as an important part, because when I always evoke nature, it's the beauty, and that's usually what we talk about. And of course, that is very beautiful. But the shaping also happens with what trauma we are causing them, because that trauma informs your trauma. And you see that what I was saying earlier, this stark contrast in what we believe and what we do, that we revere a river, consider her a goddess, yet we pollute her. And that's what was happening to the women in that city, in that place, that for us, women are like goddesses, they are so important, but yet in many ways we oppress them, we subjugate them. And so you can see connections, and I now see them very clearly, not as a young child who couldn't make sense of what was happening around me, but wanting to get out of what was happening. But you could see that what we do to nature, we also do to ourselves and to people around us. So when we pollute the river, it's of course the pollution of the river, but it's also the pollution of our mind, our bodies, our gut and marrow. And so when it's inside polluted, we also desecrate the other beings. So that relationality is now more clearer to me, which wasn't when I was growing up. And I guess that existential question that I had as a young woman, not able to make sense of why I was in that space, feeling very differently inside, but kind of pushed or made to believe very differently from outside. I wanted to get out of that space, and I wanted to understand what was happening to the world. And that took me to different places, and that took me to work with peoples and communities that shaped me, my world, my sense making and meaning making of this world a lot. And it was only in those experiences, not just with people and communities, but with forests, rivers, that I realized my own beingness, that it is never really about just myself, but what we become in relation to the other human beings and to the earth others as well. And that profoundly shapes you, because then, as you were saying earlier, a fruiting tree gives you happiness, and it's not just a simple happiness, although it's beautiful that way itself, but something is revealed all the time when we are in connection with a river, a mountain, a land, or wherever we are, because that kind of explores the dimensions of who we are and how we show up in the world, and what do we do and pay attention to. So yeah, I think those moments of, first of all, being born in that city, and then through various journeys going in different directions and working with peoples and communities, and spending and being in nature so much, that shaped in many ways what I'm doing right now.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And gosh, it's sort of like, just listening, there's like so many things popping again about this time, and what we're being shaped by, who we're being shaped by, what we're giving our attention to. And we can start to, we can understand more and more, right, with this great separation that's occurred between, the modern human and the earth community, let's say, for many of us, and what has replaced that relationship, sort of, moving around, concrete places, screens, all of these things. I always think as sort of like, we're these alive beings, aren't we? And we need all these other relationships and all these other connections for us to become fully human. And so it's not difficult to understand perhaps why we are starved of that humanness, many of us, because we don't have that relationship with an earth community. And and if we do, what is that earth community is often in such is struggling so much because of the consequences, like you said, of how we've been perceiving and seeing ourselves in relation. So yeah, it brings up a lot. So how did I would love us to talk about the rights of nature work that you are majorly immersed in, and the earthy governance work. And I would really love us to just I'm interested in many ways. I mean, we've been on the podcast, I've been over the last few years, I guess, had a few more guests. We had Paul Powsland on a couple of years ago, talking about the rights of nature work he was involved in, the rights of rivers. And I guess I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued to understand the work you're doing, and how perhaps, what are the, whether giving listeners a sense of what it actually means and what does it look like in practice. Because I'm also really fascinated with, I don't know, and I'd love to talk to you about this, but my sense is that, the rights of nature work is most alive in real places. It has to be. And potentially that's where its real power is coming, because it requires, at least in my understanding, people, it requires humans to be, to be part of that, to be involved in that guardianship, in that process of creating and monitoring and upholding those rights for these other living beings. So my sense is that, as the way the world is going, and the increasing, need for us to sort of become more local again, I think it feels like this work is going to be really, really important. But yeah, I wonder if you could just, tell us a bit about it, and particularly earthy governance, your kind of riff on all of this. I'd love it if you could explain a bit to listeners what it means, how it works, what does it look like in practice. Would that be okay?
Yeah. I'll start with a story of my own journey into this.
Yeah.
And come to rights of nature and earthy governance and stuff like that.
Perfect.
I was traveling a lot in central India 5-6 years ago to work with an indigenous community there, the Gond Adivasis, and trying to understand their worldview as to why are they asserting themselves against or resisting against this mining project. What is this deeper, wiser, more life-affirming notion of being in the world? Why are they doing this? What are their worldviews behind doing what they're doing? And in several articulations, people told us that for them, nature was their god. Leaves, trees, animals, spirits in the forest were their gods. It is with them that they take decisions. So it was not for them to decide that they can give away their lands for mining. It was for the whole collective of humans and more than humans that was part of the decision making of what should happen in that territory. So for me, as a young environment activist wanting to do something, I actually very quietly changed into looking and paying attention to the world around. And what these people were doing was basically, and are continuing to do so, is to pay attention to the winds, to the lands, to the mountains, to the rivers, and really listening the important lessons that are being taught, and seeing that there's a rhythm of being. There's a rhythm of being in tune with rest of nature. The way mountains or rivers or forest engulfs your entire entity, and then you can't see the separation between who you are and them. And so that sense of common kinship that you share with land and water and wherever you are with earth is what guides you into really caring about the natural world and standing up, facing all kinds of repression and oppression of nation states and corporations. So what was for me a political or environment justice work actually became a really important self-finding, and I continue to be in that journey, wherein the movement of the river opens the door of my own consciousness, where gently rowing, being on the boat or sitting on the banks of the river reveals the surfaces and the depths of my own existence. And so in that sense, what I've learned from people and communities and spending time with them and their worldviews is that there's the beauty and magnificence and wisdom that people hold, and most importantly, there's a deep love. And so it's not just doing for political, social justice reasons, and that is of course very, very important, but there's much more self-healing and self-transformation that happens through this kind of work, and it's about those affirmation of those worldviews. And so in many ways, rights of nature is situated there, which is that indigenous peoples across the world have actually lived in connection with nature and have revered and have taken decisions, have respected nature and have lived with its rhythms and moons, and have organized their economy, societies, decision making around that. And so can we recognize this sense of agency that people have always given to the rest of nature in our institutions, in our legal systems, that have actually, rather than respecting that worldview, have looked at nature as a resource to be exploited, appropriated, extracted to whatever levels we can for our own greed and consumption. What we are trying to understand is that rights of nature is an important movement that is actually trying to bring those worldviews in the modern systems. And in a sense, the kind of model of democracy that most countries have adopted involves citizens voting into power to set representatives who will form the government. But most actually run against the limits imposed by the compromises that become necessary to hold on to the power. Mm-hmm. And the world that we are living in is increasingly, dominated by global capital. So in the context that we are living in the nation states with rigid boundaries that don't respect the contiguity of rest of nature, rights of nature comes as an important movement to really challenge that way, that thinking, that worldview. And so that in the modern discourse, in the Western legal discourse, is a very powerful tool that can actually help us rethink about who can be in the court of law. Not just corporations, but also a river can be present there, a mountain can be there, and the forest can be there who are threatened. And so in that sense, it's a very important tool, but there are limitations also of that tool. And most importantly, the limitations are around the fact that it is in this Western legal system itself. And so it is questioning the anthropocentrism and view of nature as commodity, but it's still relying on the formal legalistic statutory foundations to get those rights recognized, which is where the limitations of it comes in. And what we're seeing across the world in some ways or the other is that rights of nature movement is undermined by the forms of governance that ignore, sidestep through their faith and growth-led developments and centralized forms of decision-making. And so that's why the concept of earthy governance, or saying that, a couple of us are articulating it as earthy governance, but really the essence of it is that communities have always had these systems, and they continue to do so through our work in India, but also through our networks. We know that in Kenya, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in so many places, people continue to have systems of governance that takes and respects rest of nature, that have rest of nature involved in the decision making. And so when a community is fighting against a mining project, it's not just their decision making, but it involves so many other beings into that decision making. Of course, there are different modes of how that decision is being done. Like the Tharaka community in Kenya is learning from the bees. The Sarayaku Nation is learning from the jaguars. The Tao people in Taiwan are learning from flying fishes. So every community has a different mode of understanding and learning from rest of nature. But essentially what we are trying to understand is that this sense of governance, of involving the more than human and be mindful and following the laws of land, water, mountains, snow, glaciers, wherever we are, has been very much part of people's worldview and articulations. And so it's important to learn as to how they have governed, what are the key lessons into their governance, what essentially we can adopt, not copy, paste or replicate in that sense, but really learn the lessons of truly an earthy governance from people who have practiced this for hundreds of years and continue to do so parallelly with the presence of the modern nation states. And yeah, there are some very, very fascinating and important lessons for all of us to learn from.
There are two stories on Spaceship Earth, a passenger story and a crew story. The passenger story is based on extraction, transaction and distraction, and it's leading us towards collapse. The crew story is based on connection, cooperation and participation. It leads towards regeneration.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Gosh, beautiful. I mean, my heart's like beating when you're talking about this earthy governance. I sort of want to know more. And as you're speaking, what I'm understanding is, or at least my take out, so the rights of nature work as a broad movement. Obviously, there's lots of great stuff that are consequences of that movement, right? It's building awareness that the living world could have its own rights. That's great, right? It's starting to seed that into the cultures, into the systems, into the sort of structures, and that's positive. And yet it's also extremely challenging because, you know, the legal constructs that it's trying to live within are inherently anthropocentric, right? And has a kind of, a sort of a political coding to it, let's say, which is quite hard to shift and change. And yet, when you're speaking of earthy governance, it's taking me really into like places, like real places, local regions, bioregions, different kind of ecosystems like mountains, rivers, and it becomes much more about how a governance system is co-created between humans, the more than human community, how over time that governance is evolved, adapted, co-created, how the knowledge continues to be shared and into generations. I'm imagining all that kind of stuff, and that to me feels like you say, there's so much important knowledge there for us to consider in these times and learn from. And also, it feels to me like that's the kind of movement that we really want to try and encourage the adoption of in places, because it, like you say, when we talked about the start, remember how disconnected there's this reconnection, that's this re-entanglement with the river and the landscape and all the beings, that becomes essential to figure out what a governance structure looks like. Do you know what I mean? That's how I'm sort of imagining it. Is that a fair take?
Yeah, I think you articulated so well, Dan. Thanks for that. That's essentially what it is. It's a form of a radical democratic politics, that goes well beyond the legalistic rights of nature framework, with first saying that power itself is exercised on ground by communities and collectives rather than centralized nation states. So there's a strong assertion to autonomy, self-determination, which indigenous peoples and other nature-dependent communities across the world have strongly asserted. And second pillar of it is that humans alone are not the ones taking decisions, and natural worlds have voice and are heard, but not bringing them to the table, but actually being in connection and in relation with them. And the autonomy is not just about taking decisions in our territories, but taking them in consultation with all elements of nature. So there is, it's not the sense of othering that we are going to include, give rights or grant rights or recognize the rights of nature, but really understanding that there is no rights, human rights without rights of nature. There are no rights of nature without human rights. So this entanglement or interconnection or this interbeingness that all of us are always in is at the heart of earthy governance, and as a very essential first element of anything that we are talking about in terms of really becoming more radical into our decision making. And radical in that sense is really true to its original meaning, which is going to the roots. So in that sense, earthy governance is not rejecting rights of nature paradigm. It's actually rather pushing beyond it. And can we talk about a culture of respect for nature that is embedded in our daily life, in our decision making, which is essentially embedded in such a way that our daily life, our daily decision making, our daily dwelling is in sync with the rhythms and the moods of natural world. And that would mean that it's a form of human and non-human relationality that is not dependent on court cases or appealing to national state governments to give rights for nature, but rather it's built on solidarity, reciprocity, interbeingness, close attention to diversity and the kinship that we share with the rest of the world. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because people are already respecting these biocultural ways of being and they are living that. So for us, what is beautiful or hopeful element of this is that these interspecies habitat and this connection is already being lived by people, and there are important lessons to be learned from them, which we can continue to do at this moment.
Beautiful. Could you maybe, I don't know, give, there's some stories, maybe it's folks you're working with, maybe it's communities you're working with, maybe it's other projects that you're familiar with, but just giving us a sense of what the Earthy, just a flavour of how Earthy governance, how does it look and feel? How's it being, you know what I mean? Just to give some sort of, some story and examples for listeners to understand how it manifests.
Yeah. So I'll go back to the same one that I was sharing earlier, wherein I went to central India trying to understand why were people resisting against this mining project and really understanding their worldviews behind it. And so that resistance was not just about protecting their territories from mining, but it was a lot more than that. Being able to successfully protect their lands and forests from the mining, there was an active deliberation in this community where I was working in central India in Kochi, this territory is called, that what would it mean to really self-govern, and how do we take decisions of what happens in our lands and territories. So they started a parallel process and formed a federation of 87 village assemblies, which was called Mahagram Sabha. And essentially what they were trying to do, despite the presence of modern nation state, is to take control of their lives and everyday decisions onto themselves. And so they organized this federation wherein they created a very intense and a complex process of decision making, but clarifying that a village assembly of maybe 50-60 households of a particular territory is the smallest unit of decision making. So decision making is not happening at the federation level, it is not happening at an executive committee level, but rather it is happening at a village assembly level, that in our village we are the government. This is the kind of a worldview that communities held. And so in that sense, for them what it was about was to create, not to concentrate power, but rather create a system where the frequent rotation of representatives for creating more capacities for people to become representatives, creating constant process of education, and really practicing the principles of radical democracy, taking decisions as a collective through consensus. But essentially, how does more than human then come in? But actually creating processes for engaging in the more than human world. So creating these pilgrimages in their forest, doing forest walks with young children, learning about, or within their community, creating more spaces to learn about their forest deities, their rituals, and all those rituals, all those principles, those self-generating, regenerating behaviors of, say, a mycelial behavior of a fungi, actually being part of decentralized distributed approaches of internal governance. So continuously learning from the forest, from the lands, from the farming about how do we take decisions. So decision making is not devoid of any of that being experienced in the forest, or about their indigenous elders, or about the forest deities and their role into what happens there. The other example that I'll share with you is from, say, the Trans-Himalayan landscape, where we have been going quite frequently, where the deity of the land of this village Kibber is always involved in decision making. And so this area is very well known for tourism, and a lot of tourists were going and climbing this mountain peak called Kanamu. And the deity actively participated in the decision making and said that, you're polluting the mountains and the forest, polluting the mountains and the grasslands. They usually call their grasslands as forest. And so I would like you to ban this. And in a non-hierarchical decision-making space, they collectively decided to let go of the money that was coming through this tourism opportunity and protect their territories. So what I'm trying to tell you with maybe just these two examples in a rather very short way, and without getting into the details of how all of this is happening, is that people are in continuous relational world of being in connection with rest of nature. And I'm not trying to say that this relationship is always harmonious. It is in a continuous reflux. There's a constant communication, but what essentially important is that it's in kinship, it's in relationship. So like you have your relatives, sometimes you have a good relationship with them, sometimes you don't, but you are still in relationship with them. And it's just like that with the rest of nature, and it's in a continuous relationship that you try to find how and when the water comes to your fields, where it goes, when the spring is swell, when it is dried, and so how do you move the water around, when do you climb a peak and when you don't, because possibly there are some other spirits, deities that acquire that space. So in that sense, you are continuously in communication, and you're designing redesigning your governance based on that. And so, for instance, this Mahagram Sabha in central India of 87 village assembly is based on a bioregion. It's not based on the rigid boundaries or political borders of the nation states, even within that state, but rather it is through their traditional boundaries, which are about ecological, cultural flows. So there's a lot of those kind of reassertion of political and more than human decision making that is happening in many of these places, that they are trying to assert, bringing the truer element of what the governance is. And so when the decisions are made, it is made based on how the winds are, how the mountains are, how the forests are, and how then they have to decide what they do in those territories.
Oh, it's beautiful listening. I was sort of imagining a very sort of dynamic. It feels like a dance, because that relation, all these relationships that are being tended to, human, more than human, and then obviously all the pressures of, sustaining communities and the pressures of development, and there's a lot going on. It feels like a really alive process. It's making me think as well, as these things are forming sort of bioregionally around, sort of shaping themselves around the actual, the ecosystems that exist, and how does this dance or interface or entangle with the more solid, rigid structures of nation and regional governance? Like what's this interplay like between what is happening in these kind of earthy governance approaches and how they are connecting into, still the existing structures and systems that are much more kind of locked and potentially human centric? Is there anything you can share about how that's playing out, or what you're learning, or
well,
because it's all in flow, isn't it? It's all happening. It's like there's no sort of perfect transition here. It's kind of like everything's emerging.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful element of transformative work, that there is no static linear transformation. It's like a spiral. It goes up and down and it goes up and down. And that's what the beauty and also the difficulty of it. And in that sense, this emergence with all of this that's happening, it's also happening in a lot of oppression, repression, and sometimes negotiations, sometimes complete disregard or complete ban, or all. So what I'm essentially trying to say, it's not easy to exercise these worldviews in the times that we are living in, because it's coming at a huge cost to live by your worldviews. And so the same community that I was mentioning to you is in the constant repression by the state, because when you assert your autonomy of being able to take decisions for yourself, for the territories that you're living in, you're challenging the authority and the power structures of the nation state. If you organize based and beyond the nation states, then of course you're challenging the very integrity and the ensemble of nation state. So in that sense, a lot of these movements of self-determination, as you would know well, are under serious repression, and the many activists, many human rights defenders, environment rights defenders work in extreme repression. But what also is happening to these territories is extremely violent, and it's difficult, first of all, to articulate of what violence we are perpetuating on the more than human world, but also that there is continuous fight against this narrative of what really protection of environment and protection of the nature is. Because the government comes up with the ideas of like, we'll create a tiger reserve because we need to protect territories of tiger, or we'll create a wildlife sanctuary, which is actually counter to the essence of what really living in harmony with nature is. Because you focus on one animal, one species, you focus on eliminating humans from those territories. Whereas what these people are saying is that if we're really talking about living in conviviality or in relationship with the rest of nature, it means that we are paying attention, that we are living and negotiating our space in relation with the earth others. And that means that you respect the rhythms and you don't design or eliminate people based on how you prefer to make profits out of it. And so all of this is unfolding in extreme difficult situations and circumstances. And so it is really important through many of our work is that many of these communities feel alone. They don't feel confident. They don't know whether these worldviews mean anything anymore in this world. So create spaces for people to come together and say that, yes, I listen to the bees and I organize and take decisions of the way bees move around and collectivize in their hives. And yeah, that is not some mumbo jumbo, but that's the way to live. Or I learn from flying fishes and understand how the wind moves when the sea will be in, when the sea will be out. And that helps me organize my life, and I'm learning from them. Or I'm learning from the mountain spirit of how to live and respect my land and my water sources. And these are not some alien concepts that exist, but this is how all our lives should be organized. So it's very important to create solidarity spaces, bring people together, and really create the spaces to self-strengthen, but also strengthen each other and not feel so alone in our struggles.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, and it's just making me think, again, like, I see, we have here at the moment, as in many countries in the West, right? But there's this sort of politically, everything's just, again, is becoming so extreme, and people's sense of politics, which, a good friend of mine would describe as, it's a consumerist politics. We just put a cross in a box every 4 years and expect someone to sort of sort things out, and part of this big disconnection that's happened between people and governance, right, from actually having any kind of real true participation in governance. And we often see, we've quite happily allowed that to go into the hands of a very few powerful people to make those decisions. But what I'm sensing now at this moment in these times on these lands is this fear that's coming around local, around politics, because it's moving further and further towards the right. And not that I hate these binaries, I'm not comfortable with them, but they're the ones that exist right now. But there is an extreme urgent need for people to become more participative, to participate more in the decision making, right, of how we want to live and the places we're in. And yet the sort of the structures that have been built for that, the political structures, are so exhausted and not built for purpose. And when I listen to you talk about, earthy governance, again, it makes me it brings me some light, because you kind of think about that, so many people are struggling with connection and relationship and loneliness, and actually what this kind of invitation of earthy governance, it can invite us back into connecting with not just this living landscapes where we are, but also the other humans, right? Because it has to be co-created. It has to be something that we do together in relationship with, the wider earth community. But it makes me think how this work is so important, because, I see rights of nature, we have, there's a lot of river action going on in this country because the rivers got so polluted for so many reasons, but rivers have become a big talking point politically here in the UK, because we have these relationships with them, and then people are starting to understand, as you set out at the start, but how how in such poor we've treated them so badly, but also lots of people have a connection to water and rivers, and it's as a centering there, the rivers seem to be pulling more people into exploring these things. But actually what we don't have is there's still this gap in people's sense of what they can do, and when you were talking about this community and the mining company, it's making me think like here, we have in the city I live, there's constantly petitions because some kind of supermarket wants to build a new supermarket by the river. This keeps happening every couple of years. It's like, not that we haven't got enough supermarkets. It's like, and they're wanting to take, a part of the river, a section of land. And there's always protests and petitions, and then it goes quiet. And then another year later, another supermarket tries to do this stuff. And it feels like these approaches we could learn so much from and begin to sort of bring them into being, I guess, because they are living processes. That's what's so, you can't sort of just, they're not like the nation constructs and the political constructs, which are so sort of solid and fixed. This requires this invitation to step into relationship, doesn't it, with the land and with each other in the community to begin to bring these kinds of governance systems into the world. But they feel really important because I get a sense here that we talked about collapse at the start of the call, didn't we? But like these political systems almost feel like they're collapsing. They're so brittle. They can't hold the complexity of what we're having to sort of consider now. And so the idea of earthy governance to me feels feels like a very sort of timely, like you say, it's an ancient practice in many ways, but it feels like it's something that could be so helpful to engage with. Sorry, that was a big ramble, but I was getting quite excited as you were speaking about it, thinking about this moment that we're in here, and because my sense is, in this country, in this culture, the need for more people to really begin to find a role in this work, whatever that looks like, is so urgent, because we know that, we have, the fascism is on the rise. It's, this country is in danger of, in its next election, of having a very far right fascist government. And so it needs people on the ground everywhere trying to create these alternatives. And the work you're doing feels very, very relevant to this moment. What do you, thinking about that, like what are you learning about the kind of watch outs and indeed the sort of the things that people might want to consider if they want to start exploring this kind of approach to community governance, I guess?
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I loved listening to your reflections. It was, there's so much to think and respond to and, say about it. But maybe to answer your question, I think I'll share something that was shared with me in June this year by one of the judges who wrote this judgment of Los Cedros forest in Ecuador, recognizing the rights of the forest to live as that of a living being, a legal person. And what the judge, his name is Augustine, he was sharing was that it is not me who wrote the judgment, but it is the forest that wrote the judgment through me. And it is the forest that organized the community. It's the forest that got scientists, conservationists, naturalists, biologists, artists, singers, local community organized to say what an essential, beautiful forest this is. And when I was listening to him, I was really feeling this powerful sense of that this judge who is pretty much into the Western legal system is talking a very different language. He's not saying, I wrote this judgment, I protected this forest, but rather saying that behind this beautiful piece of judgment is the forest itself, but a lot of people, a group, a community, that's not just about one group of people, but it includes everybody. So when we talk about democracy, when we really talk about community organizing and coming together as a collective, it is about bringing all the gifts that all of us carry to a space and putting those gifts together and making this beautiful solidarity and connection with nature. And we feel that nature is not speaking, and we think maybe if we felt, actually we would know that nature is always in communication, but we think most of the time that nature is not communicating and telling. But nature, in more than many ways, is always in communication with us, and it's only through those ways of finding our own gifts that we find the ways that rest of nature is communicating with us. And so I feel these efforts of people coming together, protecting their rivers, trying to map their rivers, create cartographies, or what are very interesting, something like resistance cartographies, trying to really highlight the multi-species community or the interspecies habitats that we all acquire, even at the heart of capitalism in the West or wherever. We're always living with the more than human world. And so how can we bring and visibilize that more? Through art, through writing, through activism, through research, through several ways, singing, but not, and really tend and pay attention to it, that we can come together and see and work. And I think most essential that has been revealed to me over the last few years is to be really witnessing what's happening. And it's as simple as that, but it's also very transformative. We have been walking along the Indus River in the Trans-Himalayan landscape with students who study zoology in colleges but have no idea of what's around them. And when we took them out to the river, just witnessing, which they had never witnessed before, the amount of pollution, the damages to the river, destruction to the river and the aquatic flora and fauna, changes something profoundly beautiful inside them. Whether they do something about it is, of course, an important element, but that's the second step. But something shifts, and that shifting is for all of us important. And that's what makes us part of one, being in relation, but also coming as a community to do something about things. And several studies have revealed that just experiencing what's happening to the other beings, humans, non-humans including, you kind of experiencing the world. So for what I'm essentially trying to say is that for all community governance, collectivization, it is important that we don't try to get a forest into the room or get a chair for the river in the boardroom, but go out to the river, be with the river, spend time with the river, listen to the animals, to the otters, to the wildflowers, pay attention. It's not really about actually enclosing those rooms, but opening our rooms and windows and our consciousness and horizons to be able to listen. And if we do that, we will really be able to listen. That's what humans have done always. So it's actually kind of giving yourself an opportunity as an individual and as a collective to harness this intuitive intelligence that humans always have had but have lost it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that, because it's it's exactly that. It's, I mean, I see this all the time. It's like the fastest way is experience, right? It's feeling. We have to feel. We have to kind of, see, touch, smell, sense our way back into relationship, and you can't do that. We can't think our way there or talk our way there and do it in rooms, and through presentations. And we've got to go out there and. A few things come up. There's a project that I'm a part of here where I live, which is with the local river, the River Avon. It's called We Are Avon. And, we did a pilgrimage. We're just starting to recruit river guardians now across the river. And We did a pilgrimage to start the project off, just to go and walk it from source to sea, and just get back into understanding it, how it flows, where it flows, and just that process of, each day different people would turn up and walk different stretches. And so not only meeting strangers and walking with them for a day, but also really starting to understand how alive the river is and where it is most sick. You can start to see there's usually no access, or there's intensive farming going on, or there's, there's industrial presence or whatever. And then seeing where the river is really starting to come to life is where there is guardianship and access and, land restoration, and so you start to see how entangled we are. Do you know what I mean? And how quickly things can shift. But also you're starting to feel like the river is somehow beginning to sort of flow through you, And then it's making it, even last weekend, I do quite a lot of work. We do quite a lot of kind of nature-based rites of passage work on some land near here. Last weekend, I had a group of young men who came onto the land and we did an overnight piece. And actually they went out in the morning to do a solo. And when they were out on the land, this big thunderstorm just ripped through. Ripped through the valley. And when they came back in and we sat around the fire, one of them said, he said, I've never felt this aliveness in me that I felt when the storm had come across. Then he goes, that compared to what I feel when I'm going about, my everyday life. And I think it really stuck with me, his words, about this need to find that aliveness in this moment, and with all of this, we talked to all these pressures we're facing and all of this overwhelm. And actually, when we find that aliveness back with the living world and our more than human kin, and that storm, it really felt like we were part of it. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't a separate thing. And I think that's it. So I think thank you for sort of bringing that in. I think coming back to it, that feels like the most essential commitment practice, isn't it, to all of this, is time with this living world, to observe and notice and listen. That's the advice. Always come back to the land or wherever it is.
Because that will awaken the sense of responsibility that all of us have. So it's not necessarily about rights. It's about what responsibility as humans we have right now, being present in this moment for the rest of the world. And that responsibility needs to be exercised, not asking for rights, but being present in the ways that actually supports and help other beings get nourished and nurtured and regenerated. So I think it's really coming back to us in terms of responsibility of being present and saying things that need to be said and asking questions that need to be asked and being present in much more grounded way than most of us are.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
If you'd like to support the running of the Spaceship Earth podcast, head over to our Substack and sign up. You'll get every episode straight to your inbox, weekly writing, plus other crew offerings. We're grateful for whatever you can give. Join us at becomingcrew.substack.com. Yeah, and like what you just said, and it's through this kind of nourishing these other beings, we nourish ourselves, because that's that entanglement that is, it can be so abstract for people, but that when you're tending to other life that's more than human, there is this kind of aliveness, this nourishment that you are receiving. And it is something that you can't intellectualize. Do you know what I mean? You can say that and people go, oh yeah, all right, well, a bit weird. But it's only until you experience, you feel that, and then you just know it. So it comes back to me, this foundational practice of growing this relationality again with the earth community around us, whether it's to develop new governance structures, whether it's to stoke your creative energy, whether it's to think about care and local economy. All of it feels rooted in that relational practice and experience.
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
So with all, right at this moment, Shrishtee, for you, what's most alive for you right now? Like with all of this work, where's your attention really being drawn to? Because I imagine again, there can be an overwhelm of things that you could get tangled up with in this work.
Yeah. Well, at this moment, the something that's really right now alive for me, which was very beautiful also, was just doing these river meditations. And I think they were very, very powerful. And of course, it's very small part of the larger work that I'm doing. But I think wherever we are, it's important that we connect to the oceans, to the rivers, to the mountains, to the forest. And meditation is not just an exercise of inner calm, of course it is of that, but it is really through that we listen to the natural world, we listen to what's around us and find a connection and a rhythm to our breathing and what exists outside. And so in that sense, what's really alive is the sense of how do we truly listen to the more than human world? And this is a question that is very alive for me at the moment. A question that is, in a sense, borrowed because Patricia Gwalinga, who was also in that meeting with us in June, said this in such a profound way and asked all of us that are we ready to listen to the more than human world? And I think I'm still understanding the question, very far away from the answer, but still understanding the question, because the more than human world is too vast, and most importantly, it needs an awakening for all of us as individuals, but crucially as collectives, to be able to really truly listen to the more than human world. Even the ones like you and I who are working on these things, living and breathing this maybe every day-to-day basis, there's something that as a collective we need to awaken, to bring them, to listen to them truly. And that for me is very, very alive as a question, as an inquiry, as an exploration as to what needs to be awakened for us to truly listen to the more than human world.
Beautiful. And is that something, when you talk of the river meditation, because that's super interesting of how, because what I'm hearing a bit when you're speaking to that again, is how to open this up into our communities and collectives to listen together. Like you say, I mean, I'm down the rabbit hole. I mean, I'm still practicing, but there's oak trees around here that have saved my life. Do you know what I mean? And I go to for sort of big decision making, but it's such an interesting question about how do we grow this as communities and collectives, particularly I guess when we're thinking about we've got to begin to make decisions together that have that. So what have you learned, or are there any experiments that you're doing that you could share a bit with around how to bring more of the community into that mode of listening?
Yeah, I mean, as you just said, in a rabbit hole, we don't know where and how far we are into that. But I guess some ways, and it's a primal instinct of humans to walk and explore. Pilgrimages has always been a way that in this part of the world, but I guess across the world, people have made sense of connection and the world in many ways. And just going by this old way of going around a mountain, walking along the rivers, that we are trying to revive the sense of collectiveness and the sense of attention and aliveness, pretty much the way you're doing in your place, of how we can listen to the stories, the meaning making that people have done through thousands of years of being, say, living along the river, and what does the river mean to people, how the river is alive. Rekindling that sense of connection and sense-making, world-making, meaning-making among young people, and reviving that sense of community that is increasingly being lost, but also revealing that when we are walking along the river, it's not just about the river, it's about the land, it's about the glaciers, it's about the drop in the clouds and the drop in the ocean. So it's about this interconnectedness, it's about the snow leopards that come to the river, it's about the blue sheep that comes to the river, it's about the otters that are in the river. So it's really this interbeingness and interrelatedness and interdependence that all of us are always in. So it's through these walks, through paying attention, through river meditations or glacier or wind meditations or whatnot, that sense of attention and focus and aliveness is what we are trying to restore. But not just that. What is essential is that I think it is important in these times to document, to narrate, to articulate these different ways of being and living and dwelling, essentially because we have been told a dominant story of progress, of development and extraction and blah, blah, blah. And so we need a lot more stories of these sorts, of stories of a river, where river speaks, a story of species and creatures that people have seen in the river. So documentation and collecting those stories and work and mapping the rivers and the species, aquatic flora and fauna, the wildflowers, everything is such an important work to do in these times. So what I'm essentially trying to say is that a lot of people as a collective and a community needs to come together to really articulate and tell different forms of stories and different stories that have been alive but somehow never ever came into our collective consciousness, and somehow they're somewhere relegated to the margins or completely vanished. So it's trying to reclaim space for those stories to different ways of being and celebrating those the diversity of that.
No, I love that, and it's something I've experienced or still experience, is that there's because again on this land that I'm a part of, many people I think struggle because there are very few elders who are holding stories of the other beings and the land and the mythologies. There are a few, but not many. I think most people would not know. So there's a sense of a forgotten. There's a kind of this opening up now of lack of intergenerational story sharing, carrying. And one of the things, and I really sense that with people, they're a bit like, I don't, but what I've been sort of sensing and trying to practice myself is like, it kind of doesn't matter. Like if it's not, I mean, if it was there, great, but it's not there, then we can capture, right? We can tell the stories that we're starting to connect with. Do you know what I mean? And we can express how we're starting to relate. And, I think that's the thing. It's there's no sort of perfect time. It's like we've got to work with whatever we've got to work with. And I think, once we begin to connect again with the living world, with our more than human family, with these places, we begin to receive, right? And we can then begin to express through whatever medium feels right for us, right? But yeah, there is something, I think, that there's a sort of a hesitation, a nervousness, and because I think also in the culture that we're in here in the West, and this is the UK, everyone has been quite programmed to feel like you have to know. Do you know what I mean? Oh, I don't know, and because it's in the head, it's like, well, no, actually, we need to play a bit here and trust what comes through us. So I'm sensing that. Yeah.
And nature is always in play. Like there's so much emergence in nature, and in a sense, it's a collective emergence. Like the individual of it might behave differently, but as we come together, that entity in itself will be emergent. So there's so much to learn from how nature is, and all of us are in many ways, in some senses.
Beautiful. So listen, I am, in the interest of time, I would love to, I just have a handful of kind of questions that are sort of a bit more about this, on my sort of becoming crew metaphors, and also just speaking to this time, of really interested in some of these themes that I'm exploring through this podcast, particularly at the moment around, for example, endings, that there are certain things that are ending. And, we spoke about it at the start about that, how even words like collapse can like really freak people out. My sense is because we're not great with seeing these cycles of life, and we're not very comfortable with thinking about endings. But I'm really interested in endings. I think if we pay attention to them, they can open up, they can become compost and nutrient and stuff. So I'm just interested in endings. So I wondered, is there anything that's ending for you right now?
Yeah, interesting, that question. I've never ever thought it like that. Something that's ending. I'm thinking about it while I've asked this question, but in a sense that I guess I would say something that's really letting other things emerge is thinking about, or not thinking anymore about just humans into decision making. My sense of coming from doing work on environment justice and social justice and all of that is beginning to let emerge. So it's coming from that very, say, maybe activity and research oriented work to it is becoming and letting emerge things in a way that I guess I see this a political, a social, and ecological and democratic and all of that project. But along with that, this work around earthy governance and all of that is a very spiritual work for me. So I think that's what is ending and emerging at the same moment.
Beautiful. I can really relate to that as you're speaking. So there's something, you sort of mentioned some communities, but we talk about, that's the thing, when we talk about even collapsing or collapse, people are sort of sensing it's out there. But are there parts of your world that you see collapsing, and is there anything that you're learning from that?
I think I'm seeing the collapse of promises that the modernity made of well-being and security for everybody if everybody passed through the stages of progress. I think that's collapsing, that false promise. I see the collapse of the modern economies and nation states in many ways, as if the system itself is collapsing and it's actually working counterintuitively. So I can see the collapse of this modern world and its edifice that it has created quite evidently. Yes, it is coming at a huge cost to a lot of people, but it is collapsing. You can see it in front of us. It's scary, but you're seeing it. As for nature, I think I'm too small or a speck of dust to comment on that. I mean, we can claim to understand what's happening in the world, especially in terms of the natural catastrophes that we see, quote unquote. But I think there are ways that nature is communicating. So attributing collapse to nature, I don't know if I can, but of the modern systems that humans have created, for sure, I can see that.
Beautiful, thank you. And I guess connected to that is uncertainty. And again, I'm really curious and interested in how we as cultures can become more comfortable with uncertainty. And so I was wondering, what is your your relationship to uncertainty? How do you approach uncertainty?
Thanks for that question, because I think it's a difficult one in terms of easy answer, but very difficult to live with. Uncertainty has been something that I think many cultures have spoken about it. The impermanence and in different ways articulated maybe the essence of it. But to live with it is very difficult, and I've experienced that through my own personal loss of my father and seeing how uncertain life of somebody so close to you is. And I think that's when you experience it a lot more, when you see that uncertainty of life so up on your face.
Yeah, really close to you.
Yeah, on your face kind of thing. So I think in that sense, for me, uncertainty is the very essence of life. But as humans, I guess, not all of us, many humans have been able to embrace it. But for it, essentially for me, I'm still in the process of embracing that sense of uncertainty, which is every moment we breathe, but difficult to accept it.
Beautiful, thank you. What is one thing that you've learned about being alive on this spaceship Earth that no school ever taught you?
I guess becoming, and like we are constantly becoming, and that becoming is never about just you. You're always in relation with the others. You're in relation with the other human beings. Like in this conversation, I think there's some becoming has happened. And it always keeps happening, and you're always becoming through mountains, rivers, and oceans. So, that's something that I've learned, and I feel that has been truly transformative for me.
Beautiful. When did you first realize you were not just a passenger on Spaceship Earth, but you're part of the crew?
Oh my God. I think I'm still in the process of realizing that. I don't think I can say that I am part of the crew. But I think I'm still realizing it, which is a nice place to be in for now, I think.
Mm-hmm. What part of the spaceship feels most broken right now?
The engine.
What's still miraculously working?
The second engine.
Who are the most under-recognised crew members on Spaceship Earth who keep the systems alive?
The people who are taking care of the engine and people who are running these systems, people who've designed these systems are the most undervalued and undermined. Indigenous communities and other nature-dependent communities, marginalized fishermen, farmers who have nourished these lands and ecosystems are completely undermined.
Beautiful. If you could ask forgiveness from one being on Earth, human, animal, whoever, what would it be?
For me, going back to my childhood, it would be the river Ganga. Because, she's a mother to all, but she's the most polluted river in the world. So I don't understand why we would do that to our mother. And I don't know if I can ask forgiveness. Sorry, I'm welling up a little bit. But,
Beautiful, thank you. I'm really interested in practices, like practices that we can practice with as humans that help us stay connected or stay in relationships. So is there a small or a strange or a sacred practice that you carry to stay in relationship with this bigger, mysterious, more than human planet?
I think for me the big practice is of attention, noticing, and you don't have to go out anywhere to do that. Notice the spider in your room trying to make a web, or bird that visits your plants in the balcony, the trees that are around you, where your water comes from. Notice these small little things and a lot will be revealed about you, yourself, and where you're living. Yeah, simple practice of attention and noticing.
Beautiful. And I guess connected to that, is there something you are convinced that people should be paying attention to in this moment? Because there's so much going on and there's so much vying for our attention as a species. But is there something you feel like we really want to pay attention to, this thing in particular?
I think just the false stories and the promises of modernity in many ways, but also the continuous false promise that are being made through various ways or articulation of sustainable development, green solutions and whatnot. Understanding, really paying attention to what's truly an alternative and what's just a facade is very important in these times, actually.
Beautiful, thank you. So you've got this idea of the passenger crew story on Spaceship Earth, and I use this invitation, becoming crew, as a provocation or invitation for this work. What does that speak to you? What does it bring up? What does it manifest at this time, becoming crew?
Well, I think becoming crew for me would mean thinking about these both elements. What does becoming mean? And the second is, what's my responsibility of that becoming? And both are very essential questions to me for my work and just as an individual. And I also think that those are the two that I will hold and continue to hold if I'm part of the crew.
Beautiful, thank you. And playing with this idea of like crew missions, tasks, things that people can do to go and, just to step into this curiosity of finding our way back into what I would call this living, mysterious operating system on board the spaceship. I guess thinking about your work and earthy governance and all the things that you're learning, like what might be something that you could offer listeners if they're curious about this? What's an invitation that they could take to go on that journey into exploring what earthy governance could mean where they live?
Well, I think it really depends on where you are, but in terms of beginning to explore that would be to find maybe a stretch of the river or a patch of forest around you. Don't go anywhere else but around you, and try to experience that space, try to see who are dependent, try to understand maybe who has nurtured that, and try to understand who has destroyed it, who has enclosed it, who has let it open, who lives there, who has disappeared. And even asking these basic questions would reveal the sense of connectedness of that space with various other things, and finding that governance is what the modern governance is and what truly an earthy governance could look like. By just exploring, I think, these basic fundamental questions around any territory, landscapes, skyscapes, riverscapes that you are in.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shrishtee. So is there anything you want to leave us with, anything to close with?
Yeah, immense gratitude to you, Dan, for this conversation, for bringing these questions to the space, being who you are and doing what you do. So, yeah, thanks for that.
Oh,
immense
thank you.
gratitude.
Thank you, Shrishtee. So yeah, huge respect for what you're doing, and I'm excited and grateful that I'm going to remain entangled with your work for some time anyway. But go well and look after yourself as well as that river.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Shrishtee. What an extraordinary human. Do follow some links, get deeper into her work on earthy governance. And yeah, there's a lot to discover and build from. And yeah, take that invitation, get out onto the land near you, whatever that looks like, and begin to listen and ask those questions that Shrishtee suggests. I think this is the seeding that we could all do. We don't need to wait to be told to do it, and who knows where it will lead. If you're interested in joining any of our action learning gatherings and events, check out those on becomingcrew.com. We have a monthly, second Friday of every month now, on the land at Ghostwood Down near Bath. It's a day of connection and practice and community. You can link to that. It's called Becoming Fridays. We are taking registrations now for Into the Dark, which is the 4th year we've run this 5-week learning journey online, which is about stepping into the darker times, both of the cycle of the year, but also metaphorically speaking, what can we find in the darkness if we pay attention to it? Again, I'll link to that and various other events and gatherings that we're starting to offer out. So you can find that on the events page on becomingcrew.com/events. If you want to stay up to date on the podcast, best way is, as I said at the start, is the Substack, becomingcrew.substack.com. If you subscribe, you'll get everything into your inbox, episodes, writing on the Substack, updates and news on events and gatherings, and all that good stuff. And if you really love what we're up to, please consider flipping to a paid subscription on the Substack. We really need more support to keep going with all this. It takes a lot of time, effort, money, resource, yada, yada, yada. So big love to those that are already supporting us. It would be lovely if we could grow that crew. If you think someone else in your network or in your community would appreciate this conversation, please do drop it in a WhatsApp or send it in a message or post on your socials, or give us some feedback on the Substack or in the Instagram comments. We would love to hear from you, and we are all needed to shift things in the ways that put life back at the center. So every little interaction, every share, all of it is participating in growing something that is bringing love, care and connection back into this world, on this spaceship Earth we call home. So thanks for listening. I'm going to stop rambling there, and what's out there. Until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles.